Hi, my name's Dave Price from the True Business Show. And today I've got a great guest, Des Taylor from Landlord Defence. Des, welcome on board.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well indeed. Yourself?
Yeah, doing absolutely fantastic. Enjoying the new weather.
Brilliant stuff. Really looking forward to this interview because I say I've got a bit of a property background myself. So I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to it or slightly scared what I'm going to learn from it as well. Um, so the first question we always start these with is, Des, how do you help people with landlord defence?
Right, so when a landlord's in distress, we help them, whether that's because they've had the council call them up and say their tenant's complaining about something. We take them through that. It could be that the tenant is making a disrepair allegation against them, so we take them through the early steps of how to deal with that. It could even be something as terrible as the local authorities decided to impose a fine on the landlord because he hasn't got a license or he hasn't complied with some regulations, or even the tenant has decided to take the action of a rent repayment order against them because they haven't complied with either licensing or a particular type of notice that's been issued by the council for landlord offences.
Right, you covered a couple of different points there that would be great
Yeah,
to drill into a little bit, actually. So the first one you mentioned was in respect of fines from the council.
yeah. So, under the Housing Act 2004, there are a number of things that a landlord is required to do. The first part being the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which is part one. Part two is about HMO licensing, and part three is about selective licensing. That's licensing normal buy to let properties. Landlords can get fined for not having applied for a license when they should have done, which is probably the most common. The other things that they get fined for is not complying with HMO management regulations, of which there are seven regulations the tenants, the landlord must comply with, and one that only the tenant must comply with. Tenants don't tend to get enforced against, landlords do, and that's probably the areas that they're most commonly done for, or they could get fined for not complying with an improvement notice, which is where the property is in disrepair and the council's decided that they want them to repair it, and the landlord decides to do nothing. Um, so it's those types of offences that they get fined for. And those fines can go up to as much as £30,000 if enforced by the council,
What?
or if they go to the magistrates court, they're unlimited.
You kidding?
Yeah,
I
absolutely unlimited.
s-
So that's level five.
right. And but the idea of taking the first step in that. So I was just bought an HMO. For whatever reason, they haven't got around to buying a license. I mean, how vicious are the council in respect to enforcing it? Is it, sorry, I'll just get on and apply for it now and everything's fine, or?
It's different. There are over 340 different councils who can issue licenses. And out of those councils, some councils, as soon as you make the application, they will open an enforcement file. You'll make the application, and by making the application, they will then look back at the history and go, you should have had a license before today, so we'll enforce against you, and they'll either take you to the magistrates court, but most of them, they will impose a financial penalty, which the landlord can appeal, but most of the time, those appeals are not successful. The alternative is for the council to say, we're going to focus on the rogue landlords who haven't applied for licenses. So the fact that you have applied for a license means you've become aware and that you're going to be compliant. So we'll go over after the 25% or so that we might have that don't, and they'll use their intelligence databases to do that. So it really depends on which council you're dealing with and how enforcement happy they are.
Did you say 320 different councils
There's
can?
over 340 different councils in the country, and all of them can issue for mandatory licensing for HMO where there were five occupants, of which two are unrelated. That needs a mandatory license, so they all would have to issue licenses for those, and landlords would need to apply. But they also have the option of introducing selective licensing for standard buy-to-let properties or additional HMO licensing where they feel there's a lot of HMOs that need to be licensed for whatever reason they've decided, and that could kick in where there are three occupants and where two are unrelated. That's called an additional HMO license. So if you're not aware of these things, as many landlords aren't, they should be, and they need to get educated.
Absolutely. With the 340 different councils, one would assume that they all take exactly the same approach as each other. Is it down to individual councils? How does that work?
No. So, for example, you can take a road in London, and I'll take it as an example. It's not picking on the councils, but Kilburn High Road. One side of the road is Camden, the other side of the road is Brent. You've got two different councils on the same road taking different approaches to enforcement.
Well,
Yeah.
yep, okay.
Think of wrong side of the tracks. Or if you actually think of it, we've got 300. There's over 50 United States in America, and if you watched some of the TV programs where they're trying to escape to get over the county line, it's a little bit like that here in England. In that, you've got councils who are doing, one is doing one way and one's doing it another way. Even though they're all following generally a national standard, they introduce local standards, and so they do it their own way.
Right. So literally you can have different standards depending on one side of the street compared to the other if they're different councils.
Yeah, can you imagine trying to explain that as a landlord to your developer or your builder? And of course, might have different tenants, different situations. It shouldn't be as complicated as it is, but it is.
Sounds like the way it is, yeah. As you say, because HMOs, my understanding, that was the main focus of licensing, and at least initially.
Yeah, it was in 2004. As what happened, the biggest change was the Housing and Planning Act that came in 2016. The Housing Planning Act 2016 changed how things were done. Previously, a local housing authority, they had to prosecute you in the magistrates court if they were going to go through the role of enforcement. Now that was a cost to them, and quite often they would get to the magistrates court, magistrates not being trained in housing, relying on the clerk of the court to advise them, and looking at what the fines were available, were fining at a much lower level than maybe a council would have liked. So they might get a £3,000 or £4,000 fine for somebody who didn't have a license or hasn't complied with management regulations, so they might get a fine for each of those offences. But at the same time, the council had all those costs. Now they get awarded some of those costs, but generally, unless it was really dangerous, there wasn't really any point of pursuing everybody and putting people out in teams, knocking on door, checking who lived there to see if they had a license. But all of that changed on the 6th of April 2017 when the Housing and Planning Act 2016 came into force. Because from that moment, the local housing authority, they were able to impose financial penalties for the same offences that they used to have to take the landlord to the magistrates court. So as long as they could prove at the same criminal level, beyond reasonable doubt, that the offence had been committed, then they were able to fine them, and they could fine them up to £30,000. The caveat to that was they had to have an enforcement policy. They had to still go through harm and culpability, the same as would be judged in a court. And the part that's pretty hard for us all to deal with is you've got the council who is making the allegation, or the complainant.
Hmm.
They're also the investigator. They're also the adjudicator, or the judge, and the beneficiary. And this is a legalized system that can only be open to some sort of way that they could be influenced for their own financial benefit. Now, I'm not saying they are, because some of them definitely aren't. But there are incidences which I've been party to, where, quite frankly, somebody's put a little bit of extra weight on the scale to push the fine up, which was proven didn't follow their policy. So it's very, very important, if you do get a fine, to seek professional advice, because what you think you're fighting against, you're usually fighting the wrong things, arguing the wrong points. And imagine if you had to go into a fight in a competitive boxing ring. You'll go, the council is like the heavyweight boxer, and you're the person who's never been in a boxing ring before. That's what you're fighting against, and they will pull punches. They'll play and punch where you weren't expecting them to punch. They're not going to play dirty. They're going to play how they're supposed to play, hard and well, to get their fines. So it is absolutely vitally important as a landlord that if you are being enforced against, get some professional advice from somebody, and find somebody who's been through this the same way as the council thousands of times before. And I hasten to add, there aren't many people who actually do understand it, because it is quite complex when you start getting into the depths of what they're trying to do and how they go about it. And most of these offences, I hate to tell you, are what they call strict liability. And that means it's very easy for them to prove that you didn't have a license, because they're the licensing authority who issues the license. But I can come on to a story about that a little bit later, where problems come on. And yes, it's not as clear cut as we always think. So that's the big thing. The other thing I probably should mention is that if you do get a fine, you do go through the process and it doesn't get changed, and you want to appeal, you can appeal to the first tier tribunal. But that is another process. Again, it's not difficult. It's knowing how it works, because the judiciary system, as somebody said to me, there is no justice. There's just you and me. So I'll just leave that at that.
like, like it. So, but by the sound of it, then the change in the legislation in 2016, is this meaning that basically councils can see the fines as a money making tool potentially
Well,
compared?
you could say that. Absolutely, you could say that. What it means is that the money that they get from enforcement has to be ring fenced and only used for enforcement purposes. So they can do more enforcement and more enforcement with that money. Now, of course, if you haven't got enough staff, you can recruit more staff. If you haven't got enough equipment, you can buy more equipment. If you haven't got enough uniforms, you can buy more uniforms. If you need transportation, so maybe they're walking and it's taking 10 times longer, maybe you could go out and buy them electric cars. Being environmentally friendly, buy them electric cars with that enforcement money so they could do more enforcement. Or as we've seen, you can also, as some of the councils are doing, one in the West Midlands, they've applied for funding for the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, commonly known as DLUP. That's Michael Gove's department, by the way. They've applied for funding, and they've got projects going on where they're literally going to go and knock on every door in certain districts and find out who lives there. And they're going to find out whether those properties need to be licensed or not. So, yeah. Now, my advice, so I learned this from a guy I was sitting next to on a plane, who claimed to have been in the American Secret Service. He said, if someone knocks on your door and they're a policeman and you didn't call them, they didn't come there for your benefit, don't open the door. Now, I say that to landlords. If someone's knocking on your door and you didn't call them, get them to put things in writing. Do not open the door and start talking to somebody, because all of those things, they're going to caution you. They're going to take down the information, and you may not be able to undo something you may later regret having said, whether that was something that incriminates you or just something, an opinion. You've got to be very, very careful. I wouldn't be opening the door to anyone today. And councils are turning up at the doors. It's not wrong what they're doing. I think it's really important that we have enforcement, but we shouldn't be opening the door to just anybody who knocks on it anymore. I think the world is too dangerous now, and you need to understand who's talking to you and what they want before you open the door.
Right. So if you are actually contacted by a council regarding any of this information, best thing is actually seek advice first rather than.
Yeah. If they say, well, I want to talk to you, I would just say to somebody, ask them to put it in writing. And if they say, can I just take your details, treat it as a cyber attack call, and just go, sorry, if you know who I am and you are who you say you are, then you will know where to write to. And that's all you need to say. And click the phone. Don't be afraid or fearful of the consequences. You are entitled to protect yourself from people who may not be who they say they are. You're absolutely entitled to it. You don't have to give your name to anyone, not even a policeman, unless he believes you have committed the crime and he needs to tell you, I believe or I think you may have been involved in something. Please don't be going around giving your name just because everybody else does. Yeah.
Right, because I would have thought most people would be quite open to engaging with the council if they realise they've done something wrong that they weren't aware of. But
Yeah. But they're investigators and they're following the same procedures as the police do generally. And what happens, the process is generally would you like me to run through the process so people know what the process is?
yeah,
So generally, the process is the council will do investigations. They will do that either using machine learning, commonly known as artificial intelligence. They will cross-reference up to 38 different databases to work out things and algorithms that will identify unlicensed properties that should be licensed. That's the first thing. The second thing they also do is they go door knocking. In some councils in London, where they've got tenement block after tenement block, they just go knocking door to door. Hello, who lives here? I'm from the council. They show them their identification. We're just doing a survey to find out who lives here. And they say, well, I live here, and now you want family or whatever. That's how they identify HMOs in additional HMO licensing areas where there aren't HMOs. So they follow that process. Then the next thing, once they've got that information, they need to get evidence beyond reasonable doubt. So they will then issue notices under the Local Government and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. Now, I remember that act in the 70s when I was a young man, because it was used a lot when the councils wanted to do compulsory purchase orders. They wanted to find out who owned the land, who had an interest in it in order to be able to buy them. You'll have seen this will have been used for HS2 and the likes, or Crossrail, where they needed to buy up land or buy up properties or remove houses in the route. They will then use something called a Section 235 notice, and that is a document which is a notice, sorry, that is used for the production of documents. So that's, you're required to produce the documents and give them to the council, those that they ask for. Those could be your bank statements, those could be rent statements, those could be the tenancies, the EICR, the gas safety certificate, the EPC. Could be anything that they choose that they need to find out what's going in the property. And they may ask you, they may ask the tenants, they may even ask the letting agent or a freeholder for those things. So those are the two steps where you can be fined if you don't produce them. And then they will move to the next stage, which is normally a police and criminal evidence interview. And they'll invite you for an in-person interview where you will go through a process of being cross-examined, like you see on the TV in these TV cop dramas. They'll have the recording machine, they'll have a couple of people, you might have a representative with you, and they'll ask you questions and they'll show you evidence to ask you questions on. Now, sometimes they do that in person, sometimes they do it through a written process. The written process, I would say, is far better than the in-person process. Because there's two things that happen here. I don't know the parts of your brain and what they're called, but there is the part of your brain that it reacts and fights or runs away. And that's the one that's going to be acting when you're in an in-person interview. And then there's the more humane brain that we have, part of our brain, which considers things and gives a proper answer. Well, if in writing, that's much, much better and much more likely that you're going to give the right answer rather than an answer that sort of might entrap you or confuses you. And I've listened to some incredible police and criminal evidence interviews, and I cannot believe what the landlords have said. Could not believe how some of the council staff asked questions, their manner, the way they went about it. Oh, one thing I can tell you for absolutely sure is no one ever came out of one of those interviews saying, I'm glad I went. That was a really exciting thing. I've really cleared my chest and I feel confident. They've always come out going, oh my God, oh, this is terrible. I wish I'd never gone. I felt, and quite often it's really the wrong thing to do. So you must seek professional advice. You really, really must. And you must seek professional advice. I hate to say, they'll send you this letter saying we want to do all these things and we want to put you under caution. And they'll advise you to go to the Citizens Advice Bureau. They can't help you. You're a landlord, you're running a business. They'll tell you to go to a law centre. They can't help you. They're for citizens as well, not for landlords. They'll tell you to go to a solicitor. Quite frankly, go to your local solicitor at your own peril. The high street solicitor is unlikely to be experienced in this type of work or this type of offence. They will be learning at your cost and to your peril. Find someone who knows what they're doing, has done it thousands of times before, and can talk wax lyrical about the law, how it works, what it means, and every last part of it. Because if they don't know that stuff, it's a bit like going to a church and the preacher doesn't know the book that he's teaching you. You know, if he can't tell you the chapters and verses, then they doesn't know his stuff. Why would you listen to him? Remember, there's lots of confidence tricksters out there, and we're seeing more and more people in the legal profession, judges, solicitors, barristers, being struck off for all sorts of reasons. You don't always need someone of that level to sort out your problems. You need somebody who knows the work and how to do it. That's the most important. And somebody's allowed to help you. Somebody who cares about you as a landlord. So following that process of the police and criminal evidence interview, it's normally then they will issue a notice of intention to impose a financial penalty, and then you make representations against that, and then they issue a notice of decision to impose a financial penalty. And if you accept it, then you pay it. And if you don't accept it, you appeal to the first tier tribunal. And if they're not happy with how that is determined, then you can go to the upper tribunal. And if you're not happy with that, you can go to the High Court. And if you're not happy with that, you can go to the Supreme Court. Now, I will tell you now, if you go to the Supreme Court, it will probably cost you more than the £30,000 of any fine. But let's say you're a landlord and you've got a massive portfolio and you haven't done what you needed to do, you could be looking at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of fines made up of lots and lots of offences. So you've got to be careful. Most people don't understand the process. And if you knew you were putting your head into a lion's mouth, you wouldn't put it in there. But you don't see it's a lion's mouth. You don't even see it's a lion. You just see what looks like a tunnel in the distance, and you can't start going towards it. And once you're on that path towards that tunnel, by the time you're so far forward, you're already in the grasp of the lion, and the lion's going to get you. So it really is important to seek professional advice. I cannot say that enough, because so many people I speak to start doing it themselves, start talking, start doing stuff, don't realize how much worse they're making it, not because they're just what they're saying, but what they're doing as well. Your most important thing is to look at the collective, look what's happening, and then decide the approach you're going to take.
Well, 'cause I could imagine a lot of, especially investors, they've got very friendly solicitors who does all the conveyancing for them. So without this conversation, I would have thought my first stop would have been if I got something like that, right, I need legal advice. Let's talk to my friendly conveyancing solicitor. But as you say, no experience on this sort of thing at all.
A conveyancing solicitor generally doesn't know about these areas and these matters. There very few do. We have a lot of referrals from solicitors who do that type of work. We have a lot of referrals from people who are in mortgage companies when people are trying to buy things and they're not exactly right, or the mortgage offer isn't going to be right. We get a lot of estate agents. We get a lot of helplines. The associations. Their people send people to us to do what they need to do, because they only have a limited amount of knowledge. So they won't be able to give you the advice or arrange for somebody to represent you who can represent you and do the right defense. A lot of people are already guilty. The fact that you're already guilty doesn't mean that you should go and start talking to the council and defending yourself, because you might be actually making things worse. But what most people do, if you're in trouble, you're in trouble, you're going to start being compliant, and you're going to start being compliant and start making your estate in order. But if you start talking to the council and start telling them absolutely everything that they don't know about, well, hold on, maybe you fixed it. Maybe you've learned your lesson. Maybe it was enough for the one offence. You don't need 88 other offences to be taken into consideration for you to learn. It only takes one fine for most landlords to learn. And those that don't learn from one fine, they're the ones they're really after. They really are after those people, but they are harder to catch. So you've got to be careful about how you go about it, but be cautious. It costs very little to get some professional initial advice. Most times you know what to do then, or how to behave, or what you need to do. And most people can find that. Landlord Licensing and Defence, our trading name of Landlords Defence, we offer a 10-minute diagnosis call, which you can find on our website at landlordsdefence.co.uk. And it's there on the top right. You'll see my mug. I talk about the more you say, the worse it gets. The more they said, the worse it gets. The more they talk, the worse it gets. And where did I learn that? I have listened to more and more interviews, and the more I listen to them and the more transcripts I read, that's where I've gone. The more they say, the worse they made it. Yeah. It's bad enough to be in trouble. The most important thing is to get yourself out of trouble and to fix the things you're doing wrong. If you were driving a car with bald tires and you got pulled over, yeah, the first thing you want to do is go into the tire replacement place and get new tires. If you had a fleet of vehicles where your tires were dodgy, you'd get the whole fleet done. Now, if they only caught you with one vehicle, you wouldn't tell them about the other 20 vehicles you just had new tires put on.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they haven't got evidence beyond reasonable doubt of those other 20 offences, then they didn't happen. So you fix the problem. And that, as a landlord, I would say the moment the council starts enforcing against you, if you are a portfolio landlord, it's not going to stop at one property. They will work through everything that you've got, and they will use those 38 different databases. They will cross check, and they will go one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And they won't do them all at the same time. They won't do them concurrently. They might do them consecutively. They might do a few concurrently, but you could find yourself at the hands of enforcement for years and years and years. Now, I'm not saying all councils are like that, but how you do one thing is how you do most things. So if you've got one property that you're not maintaining, well, what's happening with all the others? Yeah,
Yep. No,
that
very.
brings me on. So that brings me on to innocent or guilty. Most of the time, we're innocent. Most of the time, we don't realise we're doing anything wrong, but we might be guilty of an offence. So there is a particular case which is very close to my heart. Is a landlord has a property. He's given it to a letting agent because he lives at a distance. The letting agent is a very compliant letting agent. The letting agent has dozens of properties, all in selective licensing area. And they're all in the selective licensing area, and they're all compliant, apart from one property where something's happened in the relationship between the couple and everything has changed. And the tenant who's remained in the property will not allow access for anything. They won't allow access for the gas safety certificate. They won't allow access for any inspections. Now, part of the selective license conditions has a repetition of laws, which are the underlying laws should be used for not having a gas safety certificate. And that is enforceable not by your local housing authority, that's enforceable under the health and safety executive. But because they didn't have a gas safety certificate and couldn't produce it for the council, they produced to the council a list of times they'd gone to inspect the property.
Sorry, Des, can I just pause you one
Yeah.
second? I've just got someone at the door. 1 second.
Right, one sec.
We'll cut this down.
Did someone take a cup of tea?
Hi there. Sorry about that. Just to prove it,
That's okay. Is it your birthday?
I think the girlfriend's 40th birthday. So
All right. Oh, so we'll have to cut that one. So as I was saying, so they produced to the council evidence that they tried and attempted to get into the property a number of times.
Yep.
So the council then decides to issue a notice for access, a Section 239 notice, and issues that to the tenant and to the agent and to the landlord. The council eventually enters the property where the house is being smashed up. Doors have been ripped off, holes in walls, carpets have been cut up, things are smashed up, locks have been broken. The place is an absolute mess. So the tenant tells the council, I did this. The agent, I didn't let the agent in. I smashed it up. I did it all.
right.
So the agent says that they eventually talk to the tenant. The agent eventually gets the tenant to agree that they're going to have access and they're going to do the repairs. So the agent goes ahead and does the repairs. So the council then proceeds to issue a police and criminal evidence interview in writing. And so the landlord and the tenant, the landlord and the agent, sorry, produce the responses to the questions in a considered fashion, telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because
Mhm.
that's what you do in a PACE interview, to fill in the gaps for the local housing authority that concluded that the tenant had smashed the property up. And the tenant provided a witness statement to the local housing authority via the agent that said, I am responsible for these, and they signed the statement of truth as is required under the threat of perjury.
Okay.
So, what do you think happened next?
Well, if the tenant's admitting he's caused the damage, he stopped the agent being able to get a gas safety certificate.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
assuming now he's allowing access, then it's down to the agent to put the damage right, get the gas safety certificate sorted.
Yeah, that's what they did. And the local housing authority decided, in its infinite wisdom, that it has issued a selective license that says the landlord and the license holder and the agent will keep the property in good repair at all times. Sounds like a reasonable clause to me in your selective license.
Mm.
So, when the council entered the property was not in good repair,
Yep.
and it was not at all times in good repair. So, the council issued fines against the landlord, the director of the landlord, and the letting agency for breach of license conditions, not producing the gas safety certificate and not keeping the house in good repair. Now,
Do you-
you'd think, wow, what do you think when I tell you that?
I am shocked that the council would still or could actually fine you when the tenant actually admits it's all their responsibility.
How shocked are you?
I really can't see how they can justify that when the tenant's admitted responsibility. It
Okay.
seems
So,
black and
so,
white.
so you have an opportunity to make representations against that notice. So representations were made
Mhm.
detailing how this is not a fine that should be imposed, because even though they may have evidence beyond reasonable doubt, and they may well be guilty, in fining a landlord for tenant destruction is absolutely unreasonable and wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely wrong. So have a guess what happens next. Representation, representation, response, representation, representation. We're still going to impose the fine, and they issue a final fine, halving the fines for all parties involved. Halving the fines, but we are of the opinion that at no stage, even though they have been requested to produce evidence beyond reasonable doubts, has the council or the officer's manager or the CEO of that council and the councillors and the MP were copied. At no stage has anyone produced evidence beyond reasonable doubt. So, what do you think the landlord, the director, and the agent are going to do about it?
How do you even fight a claim like that?
Will you appeal to the first tier tribunal? But the cost of appealing to the first tier tribunal will be more than all the fines put together. They want closure. They want this done. Now, they know that this guy, what happened between the final notice and the intention notice and the final notice, the guy smashed the house up again. The
Ugh.
guy smashed the house up again, and the agent went back and fixed the house again. And the council came and said, "Oh yeah, it's all fixed up again." Then made that decision for the final notice. And on top of that, they said the landlord had financial gain, both the landlord and the agent. The evidence showed they had no financial gain, no financial gain from this matter. The costs, the repairs, and everything. And so the landlord and the agent, sickeningly, are agreeing to pay the fine. And yet another council that is arrogant, rude, unacceptable, thinks it's a law unto itself, will get away with murder. And this is why we as landlords need to stand up. We need to raise funds so these landlords can fight their case out of a legal fund. And we need to stop what happened to the postmasters happening to landlords. It's got to stop. And this isn't the only one. This isn't the only case. I am sick and tired of the people in councils, and it's not all councils, but those that are unreasonable, have produced no evidence, and that the upper tribunal could have ruled years ago that we do not have, the council does not have to produce evidence, does not have to produce any evidence to the landlord or anybody they're alleging until you take it to tribunal. Until you take it to tribunal and the judge orders through the directions that that evidence is produced. We've asked for the evidence, they won't produce it. And I'm actually at the point right now that we probably need to go to the public and say, this is not going to stop unless we all get together and we fund this, we get the press behind it, and we start being like Mr. Bates versus the post office, because this is unacceptable practice. They sign a selective license agreement in good faith and to be reasonable. And it's not being reasonable. It's got to stop. This is happening all the time, Dave, and it's sickening. And landlords are going, oh, well, I'll just pay the fine. How did they get to do this? It started with the parking, then the speeding. Yeah. We don't have any rehabilitation. We don't have anything. And what I am really, really shocked about is that the local housing authorities, another case we had, local housing authority has communicating by email, but when it wants to send out the notice of intention for the license, they decide to post that. But no one receives it. Not the mortgage company, not the agent, not the landlord. And they don't receive the notice of decision to grant the license. And a tenant complains about some mold that wasn't there. Council comes around and goes, oh, you haven't changed the things we said in the license we gave you. What license? Oh, they can't produce any evidence of posting it. They can produce a bunch of nonsense, but nothing proves beyond reasonable doubt. And they will rely upon the postal rule. And if you look on my Facebook, you'll see how secure the Royal Mail of the King is. It's not secure at all. They tie a trolley up against a lamppost. They leave it against the lamppost. They go off for half an hour, delivering post. Anybody can get into that box and steal it. Yet we're still allowing the postal rule across the globe, both in the UK and the US, that if you posted it, it's been delivered. And that was made a law made in the time when the postal service was the fastest way to deliver items. And under Section 247 of the Housing Act, which all of these applications say, will you accept service by email? They still choose to put it in the post. The most funny thing is they use third parties to do this, and they have to email the documents to the third parties so they can put them in envelopes to put them in the Royal Mail. You couldn't make this nonsense up. You really couldn't. I'm sorry to say, you couldn't make this nonsense up. And this is how we are defending ourselves because of contract law and all the different things that are out there. It's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And then we've got tenants who are subletting properties, getting tenant-loving, landlord-bashing firms to support them in going after the landlord, who are subcontracted from the local housing authority, suggesting to landlords to sublet their properties in breach of Article 4 and additional licensing, because the bad subletting tenant who's been caught, who's now kicked everybody out, needs the money to pay the rent. He needs the money to pay the rent. Hold on a second, just move out. This is what we're dealing with. Now, all my cases are like this, but I need to highlight, as a landlord, you are not innocent until proven guilty anymore. It is absolutely frustrating. Which brings me on to something we are proposing, lobbying for, and are going to keep lobbying for. And this is something so important. It will change the landscape forever, and it will stop these tenants doing what they're doing.
Okay.
It's radical, it's mad, it's crazy, but it has to happen. Tenant licensing schemes.
Oh,
He's called it the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Michael Gove, level up. Listen to me, Michael Gove. You level up by licensing the tenants. Let's get this going. Let's license the tenants. Let's get them so they have a license and they get endorsements or points on their license so they can be judged the same as the driver, so that they can't go into properties. Let's get an education system where before they leave school, they are taught how to be a tenant. You won't have students trashing HMOs anymore or leaving them dirty. Teach them financial responsibility and make sure it might take 10 or 15 years to get it perfected. But let's get the tenant licensing scheme in. Let's level up, Mr. Gove. Let's get this there. It won't be a vote winner for you, buddy, but it'll put you down in history. It'll put you down in history because every time you look at a triangle, you know Pythagoras' theorem. You know it. You know what that is. But he also said, if you educate the child, you will not have to punish the man. He
Very
said
true.
that, right? If we educate landlords, we educate tenants, there will be no need for this punishment. Tenants need to live in a respectable way. And when they disrespect and when they admit they've done something wrong, why are landlords being punished? I know I'm very, very sound about this. I know it frustrates me, but I have worked with too many people where the landlord is being a great guy or a great girl or a great company, and the council or some tenant loving landlord bashing organization is allowing the system to abuse the landlord, cost the landlord thousands. The judges in the courts, the judges in the tribunal service, well, quite frankly, until the tribunal service and the courts have landlords sitting on those panels, it is not leveled up either. It's not leveled up either. We really do need to do something about it. And we absolutely need a change in the law that if you are going to take evidence against somebody, I want to see it. Even for a parking ticket, they have to produce me the evidence. If I'm speeding, they have to produce me the evidence. But as a landlord, and I want anywhere between £5,000 and £30,000, no, I don't have to produce anything until I've been through the appeal process with you and then I appeal to the tribunal. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm sorry to say, it's absolutely ridiculous. Sorry to get so passionate about it. I'm not angry, by the way. People think this is anger. This is passion for what has to change. I'm not angry. I want this to change. I want fairness. I want landlords who don't do what they need to do to be enforced against. But I want the landlords to be enforced against fairly. Stop going after the soft touch guy who made a mistake. Let's get him educated. Let's get him educated. Employ me to show you what needs to be done, councils. Landlords, employ me to work for you to go against those councils. I really want to change this. And it is a shame that out of the millions of landlords we have, that the largest landlord association only has just over 100,000 members. What are the rest of you doing? You can't be that competent. You can't be that good. And if you're a big company, I'm sorry, the law is going to get you, and you are going to be as guilty as anyone. But do not let this system become the post office versus the postmasters. We know it's corrupt. We know it's wrong. And believe you me, every local authority is relying on software today. They're relying on software that is churning out incorrect documentation, incorrect information with things that are entrapment and double jeopardy that you don't even understand because you don't know the law. You don't know the law the same as I don't know all the Road Traffic Act. But I do know I need to keep within the speed limit. And have you noticed how the speed limit signs are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller?
Yep.
Yeah, they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, it's the same. People are getting licenses. They don't realise that they can represent. They don't realise that they've got to say some things. And I've read one this morning. Oh, your EICR that's got no problems on it was only a certain percentage of the circuits were tested. We're going to put a license condition on you that you need to get more than that percentage tested during the term of the license, even though he's fully compliant with the landlord regulations for electrical installations. And he's got a passing electrical installation condition report. This is what they're going to do. They're going to keep introducing offences that don't exist, that they can go after you as if they were a criminal offence. Because once they're in that license, that's a problem. So I know this seems all very controversial. I know I seem like a ranting lunatic to some of you, but actually, this is the truth. This is the facts that are going on in the place today. The PRS, the private rented sector, is constantly being blamed for things that happened in other sectors. Our Bishak was not the private rented sector. Please stop imposing on the private rented sector. Happily, the private rented sector will do what's required, but don't have something happen over here and blame the guy over or girl over here. Yeah? Fix your own house, fix your social housing, fix your landlord, your housing associations, hold them accountable, and make it that the directors of those organizations, the same as the directors of limited companies find, that they will have a fine for their negligence for the people they're vicariously responsible for. These CEOs of these landlord housing associations and these local council landlords, until they are fined and their salary is taken away from them through enforcement by their ombudsman, nothing's going to change with them, because they can go, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, that's a shame. Oh, yeah, we'll improve. Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll give them a little bit of compensation. Not even as much as a landlord gets fined. It's unfair, it's wrong, and it's got to change. Michael Gove, step up, do something, and let's get housing out of something that changes a minister more times than the calendar changes, and let's get something done in the marketplace that allows landlords to be effective, tenants to actually behave themselves, and let's get this so that enforcement is enforced against the real rogues, and let's stop using rogue landlords for guys and girls who make mistakes in companies that don't get things wrong. Let's improve this, let's train, let's make it better, let's rehabilitate. Let's make it better. But let's stop today. Stop hurting the industry that's got 390,000 people affecting it, according to PwC and their report for the National Residential Landlords Association, which was published this morning. It is absolutely nearly 400,000 people. We've only got 650 MPs to go against. Come on, let's start the revolution. Landlords for justice. We've got to do it.
I must admit, I love your idea of tenant licensing. I haven't heard anybody mention that before, but that makes so much sense to me.
How much sense? Tell me more about it, Dave. What do you really think about the idea?
As I say, just thinking it through now, the idea of how do we know we're taking a tenant in? Have they got antisocial behaviour issues in the past, etc. So knowing that we've got a tenant who has looked after properties in the past, hasn't caused any antisocial issues, they're obviously the sort of tenant we want. I suppose this is the thing in my head. What happens when that tenant carries on with that behaviour? Nobody's going to want to rent them a property eventually.
So we already have two systems, don't we? We have the private rented sector and we have the social sector, social housing. They're going to live in social housing. Let social housing deal with it. Let them up their standards. They already classify tenants in social housing. They already classify them. There's already plenty of rules about people who have needs. Somebody who's got antisocial behaviour issues doesn't need punishment. They need correction. They've got issues inside here that the fight and flight part is always there. The world's against them. They need counselling. They need therapy. They need help. And the thing is, they need to be in the social housing area. And if that's a father in a family, well, then somebody's got to start looking at what needs to happen there. What's wrong in that family? And not punish people. Take them through it. Counsel them through it. Most people can find a problem to moan about all the time. All of us can. And we can do that. You know the old phrase, it starts in the office. Somebody pisses you off. They take something of yours. You go home, the guy toots you, you scream at him, he shouts at you, there's nearly a crash. You drive into the drive, you go a little bit angry, you open the door a little bit angry. Your wife asks you, have you had a nice day? You scream at her or her husband. The kids say something, and then everybody's pissing you off and you kick the cat. We've all heard the story. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, most people with antisocial behavior, they want help. They want help. Like the lady with the agent and the landlord with the house which was being smashed up. Interestingly, it got referred to the antisocial behaviour unit of the council, and the police and the council are putting a closure order on that house. Oh, so maybe the landlord isn't guilty. Oh, maybe this needs an investigative reporter to really get involved in this. And let's take that council and their behaviour and their CEO, and let's get something done about them. Until CEOs of councils are made responsible for the actions of their people that are illegal or wrong, nothing's going to change. And most of them are on over £100,000 a year. So maybe if they're unemployed for a little while. And what do we do with local housing authorities that are run by bad people who don't know how to run local housing authorities? Let's look at Birmingham. We put in 6 directors from other councils. Well, most councils can't make money. So why didn't we put some businessmen in there, or businesswomen, or some business leaders to sort out the corruption in Birmingham Council? I don't think Birmingham Council or any of these councils that are going bankrupt are behaving themselves. I don't think they're ring fencing the money. And the whistleblowing lawyers and the whistleblowing people are beginning to talk to me. If you work in a local housing authority and your council is misbehaving, come and talk to me. I want the information. I want the information, because if they're spending money that's ring fenced for enforcement and other things, we need to know about it. If they're misbehaving, we want to know about it. If they're putting their fat belly on the scales to up the fines, we want to know about it. If finance has told them that the cost of the license should be higher than the actual cost, we want to know about it. We have to expose the bad ones so the good ones can continue to be good, and we can put good leaders into those councils to do the enforcement properly. We cannot afford to have repetition in housing of what we saw in the policing in the 70s and 80s. The policing in this country was very bad in the 70s and 80s. When I was a kid with an Irish background, I will never forget the Birmingham 6 or the Guildford 4. They may have been naughty people, but they didn't commit those crimes. We have to get very, very, very clear. Housing has to be accountable, and local housing authorities and their enforcement, criminal evidence beyond reasonable doubt, we have to campaign for that to be produced at the point of the notice of intention to grant, to impose a financial penalty. And the notice of intention to impose a financial penalty should be supported with evidence. Very few councils will provide it, and those that do, believe you me, the matter gets sorted far more quickly with less antagonism. And have a guess what? You get a very, very, very quickly rehabilitated landlord who becomes very, very compliant and a great advocate for other landlords and supporting the council's enforcement. We've got to change the minds of these money-grabbing CEOs and their finance departments who tell their enforcement departments, just keep going after the money. Those ones have got to go. There are great councils. I spent some time with one last night, and I have to say, my experience of dealing with them, with enforcement, with licensing, everything about them, I must say, having been in their meeting and their forum last night, all I could say was they know about enforcement the way it's meant to be. They enforce properly. They enforce the right people. And as the guy said, I ain't focusing on the 75% who are applying for licenses. I'm looking at the 25% who aren't. Yeah. That's what we want. Enforcement of those who do not care, not enforcement for those who do but have made mistakes. If I make a mistake and speed over 30 near my house, I'm likely to go on a speed awareness course, and I'm going to be educated. If I drink drive, I can go to which I don't understand. You go to a court. I was in a court recently. If you drink drive, there's leaflets about getting time off your sentence by having a rehabilitation course. Why wasn't that given at the driving test? Why wasn't that education course given at the driving test level? If I want to get an alcohol license for a pub or a restaurant, The local housing authority will make me go through a food hygiene course and get a certificate and an alcohol understanding course before they give me a license. Why are we not doing this with housing? It's not that hard. And I'm ready to teach them. I will teach the landlords. I'll teach them how to do it as a landlord, not as an enforcing authority. Pay me to do that. I'll build the teams. We'll build them across the country. We'll make it happen. Because I've worked in companies where we've had tens of thousands of employees delivering services all across the country. I know the people to put in place to make that deliver, and that could be done relatively quickly. So really do want to push this hard and fast. We want proper enforcement, but we don't want the enforcement where it's unfair, where innocent people are suffering while rogues are getting away with it. Nobody does. Nobody likes it. As somebody once said to me, we always want people to get ahead of us, but we tend to not want them to get ahead of us too much. And that's what's happening at the moment. Yeah, the council's getting too ahead of themselves, some of them are taking too much money. Others are really good. Some of them we love dealing with, but some of them I just wish they would stop being the bully boys and think they came out of a 1970s TV cop drama.
Yeah, is that
Dave,
fair?
a lot covered there. There's plenty more I could have covered, I'm sure.
Well, one last thing I wanted to ask you about before we go, actually.
Yeah.
As you say, with everything you just talked about, is the Renters Reform Bill.
Yes.
I'm not
What's
sure.
in there?
Yeah.
What's in the Renters Reform Bill for landlords? It's pretty dull, isn't it? Okay. So let me tell you what the Renters Reform Bill does for landlords. It gives more power to the local housing authority to enforce on matters which currently they would have to take you to court for. Not putting your tenancy right, not doing things in your tenancy, not getting things right with deposits, not complying with the law. They've taken a bunch of laws, like they did with the Housing and Planning Act 2016. They've taken a bunch of laws and made it easy for the local authority to impose a fine upon you rather than take you through the magistrate's court system. That's the biggest change. And nobody's talking about it. People are talking about it. They don't realize that the local housing authorities, one, don't have the resources. Two, it's a statutory duty which they will fail in. And three, once it's like this, it cannot work without tenant licensing schemes and enforcement against tenants. Until the councils start fining tenants because they breach their licenses, we are never, ever going to win. The removal of Section 21, I'm sure they're going to come up with something else. The court system is wrong. The court system isn't right. I do not believe under any circumstances the eviction process needs a court system. It needs a tribunal system. It needs to come out of the court system, go into the tribunal system. More so because the tribunal system does address things so much better. It is a little bit easier. And because most people are making mistakes, the tribunal is actually, in my experience, much more forgiving. But the court is like, well, just thrown out another 6 months. Hold on. Well, I can fix that. I've got the document. Nah, I've thrown out another 6 months. It is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So it needs to go into a tribunal system. The tribunal judges need further training. The tribunal panels need further training. And landlords, if you believe you understand housing law well enough or could be trained well enough, you must start getting into the tribunal system and getting on those panels. So landlords can actually have a fair chance, because nearly everyone I go to, there's a judge and there's a panel member, and then normally an environmental health officer or a RIC surveyor. And, they want everything to be perfect, but I don't see landlords who go, well, actually, in fact, yeah, I've had that experience. And yeah, I think really we should give the guy the benefit of the doubt. We've got to get this changed. It's not corrupt. It's just wrong. The system just doesn't work. And everybody knows it. Everybody in the judiciary system knows it. All the lawyers know it. We've got to do something. We've got to have major reform, because under the Magna Carta, we are entitled to be tried by our peers. Well, if there is no landlord on that panel, where are our peers? Yeah.
Good
And
point.
yeah, so where are our peers? So we're not being done. And quite frankly, if we had the time, the effort, the money, the wherewithal to do it, I'm sure we could probably go through it thousands of convictions a day and thousands of offences which people pay fines on every day and overturn them. What we can't do, we haven't got time to do that. So we've got to change it and make it fair to go forward. Landlords, I really am in agreement with the landlords to have a portal. I really do agree that there is a system that we can put out for landlords, which they can put all their certifications in. I believe we have the technology that inspections of houses can be done by people that can be trained to do them. It can all be recorded. It can all be going into the database. I don't think that database needs to be open to the public. I think it needs to be similar to the car system database. I can verify a house is licensed or a car is got an MOT or tax. I can verify that. I can verify if a car is insured. So I can verify all those things, but I don't need to know who owns the car. I don't need to know where he lives. I don't need to go and campaign outside his house because he's got a bald tire type thing. So there are systems and processes we already know work. And I'm very keen to work with the authorities to create a fair system like we have a fair system. I think our driving system is quite fair. I know that if I want to drive 150 miles an hour, there are consequences. Yeah. I know if I want to be on my phone, I know there are consequences. I know if I want to eat a Mars bar while I'm driving, there are consequences, even though most people do it. I know they do. I see them. Yeah. There are consequences. So do we have in cars, it's called driving without due care and attention. It's 3 points on your license, an increase in your insurance premium. 3 years later, it goes away. Why are we not doing something like this for landlords and for tenants? Why not? Why not? Because some things aren't. Listen, I'm a landlord. I was not managing with due care and attention. 3 points. 12 are banned. Yeah. Why?
Yep.
Oh, why? Oh, why? Why are we reinventing the wheels? Come on. Rome was not built in a day. But let's get it fixed. And fire. I read an interesting article yesterday about fire, about the interest of how fire was started, the discovery of fire, how fire is fascinating.
Right.
But let me tell you, fire is also the most dangerous thing in the world because it can burn you to death. And that's why we need enforcement. That's why we need compliance. That's why we all need to be good landlords.
Love it.
I don't know what else to say, Dave. I've given you a lot. I could be on here all day. I've got so much to say. I could be here all day.
It's just lovely to talk to someone who's so passionate about what they actually do.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I actually understand it. The problem is nobody understands it. I understand it. I'm really passionate about it. I actually want to fix it. If I go through all my cases, which I'm going to start doing, I'm going to start going through all my cases and telling stories on them all because this is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous what's going on. But those stories are told you they're absolutely true. Absolutely true. Innocent people being told, off the record, one of them being told by a judge they should just take the fine. So why? Why? I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't post me what you showed me you post me. So just it is one of those things.